These are the visuals of Christian priests instigating locals against the construction of the strategic Vizhinjam port in Kerala. Black flags were hoisted in churches of the Latin Archdiocese in the state capital. Red, yellow, white flags of the Latin Catholic Church have also been fluttering from the tents of the local fishing community. Protesters have managed to halt the construction of the port by blocking materials from entering the site. The Latin Catholic Church at Thiruvananthapuram has been at the forefront of these protests. Congress leaders in Kerala have visited the protest site and backed the protests. On the face of it, the protest might look justified, with demands like rehabilitation, compensation for those affected, etc. And the Kerala state government has accepted most of these demands except one: halting of the construction of the port. The proposed port at Vizhinjam is a deep-water multi-purpose international seaport and container transshipment terminal being constructed by Adani Vizhinjam Ports Private Limited. It is expected to boost India's maritime ambitions significantly. Strategically located and connecting the western and the eastern parts of the world, the Vizhinjam port, once complete, will emerge as a competitor to other global transshipment hubs like Dubai, Colombo, and Singapore. The port will be able to handle Megamax container ships, and around 80% of the country's cargo transshipments will pass through here. Thus, Vizhinjam will not just anchor India's strategic position on the Indo-Pacific region, but will also pave way for rapid economic development along the likes of Singapore. The project, costing 7,500 crores, was signed during the tenure of the Congress-led UDF government led by Chief Minister Oommen Chandy. Construction began in December 2015, and Adani Group Chief Gautam Adani claimed that the first ship would berth there on September 1st, 2018, in less than 1,000 days. However, Cyclone Oki in 2017 and the pandemic in 2019 delayed the completion. Currently, phase 1 of the project is now close to 80% completion, but with the protests intensifying and supported by the church, the project has once again been delayed. Incidentally, these protests have also coincided with the movement of Chinese spy vessel in nearby Sri Lanka. But this isn't the first protest where the church has been involved. The protests against the Sterlite copper factory in Thoothukudi were also orchestrated by the church, a bunch of NGOs, and a section of the media peddling lies about the factors causing cancer among the locals. Just like the men in white cassocks at Vizhinjam, an evangelical pastor instigated the Christian population to protest and dispose of the factory from Thoothukudi. The engineered social unrest, which received political patronage from parties like the DMK, CPI, and other separatist outfits, led to the closure of the Sterlite plant. Since then, India has become a net importer of copper for the first time in 18 years. Pakistan's copper exports to China have surged by 400%. India's revenue from copper exports has decreased by 87%. The Kudankulam nuclear power plant had also faced similar hurdles when the Congress-led UPA was in power. Similarly, the neutrino project has been facing protests due to fear-mongering and peddling of misinformation by dubious environmental NGOs. In fact, the NGO which has been peddling lies against the neutrino project is the same organization that gave legal support to People's Movement Against Nuclear Energy, an organization accused of receiving foreign funding to sustain agitations against the Kudankulam nuclear power plant. All these protests have something in common. They are protests based on baseless claims, supported or spearheaded by activists who either have their own organizations or are supported by the ones which are foreign funded. Former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh himself had blamed such NGOs with foreign hand trying to create unrest in an attempt to impede the development of the country. And now the Communist Chief Minister of Kerala himself has told in the Kerala Assembly that the protests against the Vizhinjam port seem to be orchestrated. But the Communist Party and the Congress in Kerala don't seem too keen on quelling the protest, as they fear that they may lose the votes of the Latin Catholic community, who account for 13% of the Christian population in the state. The Congress also finds itself at the receiving end of these protests, as it was the Congress government that signed the deal with the Adani Group back in the day. The Vizhinjam port is the need of the hour to counter China's advances in the Indo-Pacific region. However, there seems to be a foreign hand at work to impede India's rise by orchestrating protests against crucial developmental projects. It is high time that political parties shed their myopic view and launch a crackdown on these orchestrated protests for the sake of national interest.